All right, let's go ahead and get started with Class 7 material. Money in the Federal Reserve System. So we're going to learn about money, what the money supply is, and how the Federal Reserve can influence the money supply to spur the economy if necessary, or prevent inflation if necessary. We talked a number of ways last time about how we could solve economic recession. And we talked about it just from the standpoint of increasing spending, increasing GDP, and now we're going to learn yet another tool, controlling the money supply, and see how the Federal Reserve can use that to maintain the economic health of our economy. All right, so the first chapter, you all got my note. We're skipping one of the chapters. I forget which one. But the first chapter we'll talk about 18, 3 functions of money, definition of money, and just a little bit of an introduction to the Federal Reserve. And then in the next chapter we'll talk about what the Federal Reserve does. So first, money and the money supply. So the thing about money is it just helps us run a more efficient economy. If we didn't have money, we would have to barter for everything. I remember when my economics professor explained it to our class, he said, well, if we didn't have money, then I would have to give someone an economics lecture first thing in the morning just so I could get a bowl of cereal. And it would be very inefficient. So I guess I can tell you the same thing. I would have to give an economics lecture just to get a bowl of cereal each morning. You think that's bad? I mean, I feel bad for Crystal. She would have to say, let me do an admissions event for you. And just to get along, and how many people would she need to ask before someone would say, here's a bowl of cereal. So money just makes it more efficient. Instead of a direct exchange for one good for another, we have money. All right, money has 3 features we'll talk about very quickly. Medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. Essentially, money just simplifies and therefore increases market transactions. So the easier it is for me to provide those economic lectures, the better. The more I can get the value out of what Crystal offers by making a different medium of exchange, the better. The more we can provide our goods and services to society, the better economic health for everyone. So these 3 functions of money: medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value. Let's talk about the first one, medium of exchange. Just exchange for goods and services. That is, of course, essential. Second thing, unit of account. So this is how many bowls of cereal would I get for my economics lecture. Hopefully maybe 10 or 20. So I can use that economic value of my lecture and have an understanding of what I would get in exchange for other types of goods and services.
You don't have to find people who want to hear an economics.
Yeah, yes, just to get one bowl of cereal. All right, and lastly, store of value. So I give this economics lecture tonight. Hopefully I can store up maybe 20 bowls of cereal and eat those over time. I can hold money and know that I'm going to get goods and services at a later time for it. So this is essential also, so that I'm willing to provide more of my goods and services, knowing that that's going to be worth something, and knowing that that's going to be worth something that I can save. And everybody knows that. All right, the people who provide us good food, the people who provide us good housing, they all know that they'll get money that they could save, and they would have a store of value, a value that's worth something. If we ever question that assumption, then our economy would be on very shaky ground. All right, so a couple other important features of money. Portable, you have to be able to take it around to be able to spend it, otherwise we'd have a restricted economy. Divisible, you don't want to just walk around with $100 bills. It would be hard, it would be difficult to get the type of transactions you want and assign the appropriate amount of value for each transaction. Uniform and acceptable. We just need an acceptable form of currency. And we need the people that we give that money to have faith that they're going to be able to get value out of it. All right, so we know the value of money lifting us from a barter economy, and we know those characteristics are important to maintaining a well-functioning economy. Money is liquid, available to spend in exchange for goods and services without any additional expense. So this is important. We don't want that currency that I get in exchange for providing my economic lecture. Hey, how you doing? The less friction there is in me being able to exchange that for goods and services that Lonnie offers, Andres offers, the better. All right, now we get to the central question of tonight. What is the ideal money supply? Lawmakers, treasurers, how much money should they provide in an economy? And this is it. The supply of money must be great enough to meet ordinary transaction needs, but not so plentiful that it becomes worthless. So the first part of that, we need enough money so that I can pay for things that I want, so I can get your goods and services, so that you can provide them to me, so that we can get that economic harmony going of everyone giving what they're able to and having a value assigned to that, all that stuff we need. And then we'll look at a nuance of that later. Not only should there be enough money to provide those transactions, but we also want to think about there being enough money where if someone is a little short of cash, they could borrow it. And we want to think about how the Fed creates an environment where people could borrow money if they need to keep the economy functioning. But then the second part, what do you think about this? But not so plentiful that it becomes worthless. Pretty bold statement, right? What would that mean if money is so plentiful it's becoming worthless?
Hyperinflation.
Hyperinflation, yeah. So hyperinflation or smaller version, nuances of inflation. And it becomes worth less, much less next year than it is now. Yeah, so we want to supply the right amount of money so that we have enough to meet these transaction needs, but we don't want it so plentiful that the value of it becomes eroded due to inflation. All right, so let's talk about what that supply of money is and how we can think about getting it to the right amount. So, two quick definitions. The money supply, M1, M2. Commonly, you'll hear money described that way. All right, what is the M1? Well, that's a certain amount of money. The M2 is a certain less liquid amount of money. Let's just go over those definitions so you have a good ballpark understanding. M1, narrowest definition of money, currency and checkable deposits. So the actual cash you have in your pockets right now, that's part of the M1 money supply. You could actually pay me for an additional economics information, right? Like if you had cash in your pocket right now, you could give it to me, I could provide you more economic value or more economic understanding. Checkable deposits, meaning something that you could write a check on, and you could easily provide those funds for food, for housing, for whatever you need. M1, the most liquid of our money supply. M2 is a broader definition of money. It includes everything in M1 plus savings deposits and time deposits of less than $100,000. Now, time deposits mean like certificate of deposit that is going to be due in a year or two. That's what they mean by time. Like within 1 year, you'll be able to take it out without penalty. So it's not completely liquid. If you wanted to spend that money to get the economy going, or the government wanted you to spend that money to get the economy going, it would not be dumped into our economy as fast as the money supply in M1. All right. Does that make sense? All right. We've got the most liquid M1 and the slightly less liquid M2. And we'll talk later about how if the lawmakers, the economists, want to spur the economy, they might concentrate their efforts here. Let's get more M1 in the economy and get more spending going. All right, just not that it really matters, but just so we have context. How big is our money supply? Looks like we have our M1 at $2.6 trillion floating out there. That's how much money could potentially be chasing goods and services. So the more money chasing more goods and services could potentially have that problem of the money becoming worth less. Not worthless, but worth a little bit less if we have a larger amount of that money. And then if you look over to the right, we've got the M2. Remember, the M2 includes the M1 of the $2.6 trillion. And we've got a bunch of people holding savings deposits, small-time deposits. We're at about $11 trillion M2 money supply. So we don't have really any understanding of exactly what that means. So what does that mean? $11 trillion of the money supply. Well, we don't know, but we do know that that's where equilibrium has been set at the current time. And we can think about, well, what if we were to increase that? Or what if we put a little bit more money in the economy, give people a little bit more access to the funds they could use to get the economy spurred? So we won't think so much about what that number is. We'll just think about what if we increase it a little bit or decrease it a little bit. Make sense?
You mean money, like paper money?
Yeah, like the cash you have in your
How
wallet.
much should we print?
Yeah, how much should we print? Exactly. Should we print a little bit more? Well, it's also not so much just printing a little bit more, but what can we do to put more money in the economy, i.e. money that's not tied up in long-term debt might be an example. Say, let's give that money back instead of having them invest that in the Fed. But printing money is actually a component of it, yes. Question?
No, I never really heard people talk about M1 and M2 before, so is that a real point of discussion and distinction in any place? I've never.
Has anyone else heard of M1 or M2?
Is that what's also like on the actual bills? Like
Real
I've
money?
seen M1 and 2s on
Really?
the bills. Yeah. Or, no.
Well, bills are all M1. I don't know, maybe it's more of an academic discussion, but I've heard it in every economics class that I've taken. And we can think about it just in terms of if we want to get the economy going faster, right, do we want to pour more M1 into the economy, or do we want to pour more M2 into the economy? Like if we want to pour more M2 in the economy, we might try to think about how we would do that. I think we want to think about how we would do that. But,
No, I was just thinking, a lot of discussion recent years have been the fact that people are sitting on some pretty hefty savings deposits in light of the crash of 2009, and there has been a lot of discussion. How are you going to bring that money out for investments or doing other things? I mean, banks are doing the same thing. They're sitting on money. It's harder to get loans, and you've got a lot of these individuals who are sitting on a lot of money, and they're in the savings and short-term deposit accounts.
Yeah, so if they spend it, it could have an effect of spurring the economy. And that will be along the lines of what we've talked about in previous classes, people just spending more and getting the economy going. But actually, interestingly, what we'll learn tonight is that doesn't so much hurt us if people just have money sitting in the bank, because the money you have sitting in the bank that you're not using, the bank can loan out to Lonnie to start her business. And if you're not going to spend it, she's going to spend it.
Well, but that's the other issue is the banks have not been loaning the money. Even though they've cut the interest rates, the banks are still sitting on money. Now they're starting to loosen up now, but for several years, the banks just wouldn't loan money.
And that is the problem, yes. All right, so the problem is not so much that you're not spending your money in the bank, because if the bank sees that they have all this extra money, they could loan it out to someone who would spend it. But the problem is exactly what Dr. Williams is raising. If the bank is afraid to loan out money, then that is a problem. So we, as the Fed Board of Governors, need to think about how we can encourage the banks to loan that money. All right, speaking of the Fed, let's do an overview of the Fed, Federal Reserve System. I'm sure you've heard of it. The people who set interest rates, they do more than set interest rates. They also control the whole money supply. Let me actually skip ahead to the next slide. control the money supply, clear checks. So if you write a check, it will actually clear through one of the 12 districts of the Federal Reserve, hopefully faster rather than sooner to prevent any illegal activity. Supervise and regulate banks, maintain and circulate currency, print more currency if they need to, protect consumers, maintain federal government checking accounts, and gold. So the Fed, not only they do perform that function of controlling the money supply to make sure that we don't have inflation and to spur our economy out of recession if possible, but they also do all these other things. So we've got 12 districts. I think where this matters is essentially where checks might be sent to clear. Suppose if you're in Nevada and you write a check, it might clear through San Francisco. I don't know. It's been a long time since I worked in banking. I actually had a job as a bank teller slash loan officer. When the hell was it? 1998? Is that like 18 years ago? So I imagine a lot has changed since then. So I don't know if they actually still send the paper checks to the district banks. I'm sure there's an automated system, but the district's banking system is still in place to do that function of supporting clearing checks. Also maintaining excess cash. So if a bank has a lot of cash in their vault and they say we don't want to hold all this cash, they can send it to the Fed. Sometimes they're also required, as we will see, to send certain amounts of cash to the Fed. They need a reserve requirement, just to make sure everything's backed up accordingly. All right, so Board of Governors of the Fed. At the top, there's a little pyramid here. All right, I'm going to skip ahead like 3 or 4 slides. All right, at the top we have the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. These are 7 members appointed by the President who oversee the Fed. They oversee the different regional banks, the 12 district banks, and apparently there are different branches within those 12 regions. 25 branch banks. So I don't know, maybe in the California area they have 2 branch banks. Maybe there's an extra branch bank in New York, extra branch bank in the Texas region. So those banks will serve pretty much the entire U.S. banking system. Most banks are members of the Fed, and there's also some nuance where even if you're not a card-carrying member of the Fed, you still have to follow certain rules according to the Fed. So essentially the Fed, these 12 district banks, oversee and service every bank within the United States. And at the top of that are the 7 Board of Governors members who are appointed by the President. And then there's one person at the top of the Board of Governors, the chair of the Board of Governors, who is appointed by the President and confirmed by Congress, who is the chair of the Fed. And the current chair of the Fed, anyone know? Janet Yellen. Yes. And what does Janet Yellen do? What is she known for doing?
Interest rates.
Determining interest rates. All right, she will raise or lower, yes.
I actually work downtown Manhattan, and next to the Federal Reserve building. It's huge,
Oh, wow.
but it's guarded like the White House.
Wow.
So I'm assuming.
I thought that's where they keep the gold, right?
I guess that's what it is, right?
They keep the gold, yeah.
I think I may be wrong.
And,
Some
Yeah,
Fort
we're
Knox.
heavily
Or
guarded.
this gold, but I think there's gold in New York, actually.
and they must keep the reserves for 1/12 of the nation. So if
Was
somebody
that there on Wall Street?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I had an interview there like a couple
Yeah.
months ago, and there's like unmarked sedans and SUVs there like all the time.
No, but like
So it makes sense.
big guns. We're not just talking about security.
Yeah.
like the
Like
the ones-
AR-15s.
the ones-
Yeah,
Yeah.
shotguns
Holy
and stuff.
I
Oh,
walk
boy.
by there during lunch. I'm like, all right.
All right, I'm good. Cool. They're like, as long as you don't take our money, we won't have a problem. All right. So Janet Yellen is appointed to be the chair of the Board of Governors, and as we mentioned, the primary thing we hear about her doing is raising or lowering interest rates. So when does she want to raise interest rates? When does she want to lower interest rates? When she has money in the bank, she wants to raise them. When she doesn't have money in the bank, she wants to lower them. That might be part. No, that's a joke.
Lower
That's a
them
joke.
when the
That's a
money
joke.
market's high, and raise them when the money market's low.
Okay.
Or
well,
did I
let's
get that
talk-
wrong?
What do you think? Well, let's talk in terms of recession or expansion. All right, if the economy is an expansion, meaning it's booming, what might she want to do?
She's gonna raise them.
Yeah, why would she do that?
Inflation.
Inflation, that's it. So it's inflation. She's trying to guard against inflation and recession. She's just balancing in between this. When we're in recession, that's bad because people are out of work. Not great for our economy. So let's do what we can to get the economy running again. All right? When the economy is in expansion, the danger there is inflation. And we want the money supply to be plentiful enough to accomplish normal transactions, but not so plentiful that it becomes worthless. Remember that slide 15 slides ago. So if the economy is in expansion, she might raise interest rates to make money less plentiful. All right, to make banks less willing, well, banks would still be willing to lend, but it would be harder to borrow money. When interest rates are high, it's harder for Stephanie to get that loan to buy some extra things to build her business. When interest rates are low, it's easier for Stephanie to get that loan. So that would serve to spur the economy.
Easier to get it or easier to pay?
Yeah,
You
both.
can get it.
Both, yeah. So easier to pay, I
Be
guess.
approved.
Easier to be approved. Yeah, they wouldn't look as closely at her business plan and say, oh, she can easily pay those interest rates. Yeah. And this is just a warm up. We're going to talk about this concept the entire class tonight. All right. So I skipped over some stuff. Let me go back. So we've got the Board of Governors, 7 members appointed by the presidents who serve non-renewable 14-year terms. So they're there for a while. And the idea is they're there. They can only be there once. They don't ever have to face reconfirmation, re-election. So they should be able to make independent decisions just based on the health of the economy, not based on what the population or what the popular trend is at the time. They supervise and control the money supply and the U.S. banking system. The president designates one member of the board to serve as a chair for a renewable 4-year term. So Janet Yellen, I think, used to be the vice chair of the board, and she is now the chair of the board. And the other people on the board of governors, so there's 7 board of governors in the Fed. Now they can technically outvote her, but she, as the chair, has certain power. She can assign committees. She can kind of rally support. She knows people. She maybe thinks about getting on the right side of the issues. So she, as the chair, has the most power. And she is also the person who will speak to Congress, I believe, twice a year about the health of the economy. And when Janet Yellen is speaking to the Congress about the health of the economy, the markets are watching her. And they're wondering whether or not she's going to raise interest rates. So if she raises interest rates, she's doing that to cool off the economy, to prevent inflation. But the disadvantage is that's going to make it harder for Stephanie to get her loan and harder to pay her loan. So Wall Street might be a little disappointed if Janet Yellen raises interest rates. Wall Street would be really happy if she lowers interest rates. She's going to do that to spur the economy. So you can actually chart the market while she's making a presentation. Like you can see, based on what she's saying, whether the market is going up or down. It sounds like she's going to raise interest rates, the market kind of starts to go down. It starts sounding a little sweeter. It starts to go what? Yeah.
Is it really Janet Yellen making a choice to raise it or lower it, or is it based on the numbers?
You mean like the other vote?
How well is the economy doing? Okay, then if it's this number, we should raise it 0.2. No.
Well, yeah, it's based on the numbers, but it's based on her analysis, and there's so many different opinions about what we should do. Some people think we should raise interest rates. Some people think we should lower interest rates. Like what's been going on recently? We're still feeling vulnerable from this recession of 2008. And that was, 8 years ago? So some people say, all right, it's time to start raising interest rates. We're getting to enough of this really low interest. It's been 8 years. You can raise interest rates, and it's going to be okay at this point. But some people say, no, keep interest rates as low as you possibly can. Keep the money supply as high as you possibly can. So there's definitely different opinions, and we'll continue talking about some of the components of what goes into that decision. Anyways.
They also have to be very careful of what they say, because there was an issue when Alan Greenspan was there. I forget the exact 2 words he said, but as soon as he said it, that whole week the market tanked. Just because of the 2 words Greenspan uttered, whatever speech it was.
Yeah, I don't remember that exact incident, but that certainly sounds familiar. So Janet Yellen, Alan Greenspan, anyone in that position needs to be very careful about the words they choose, because the market is watching. All right, so gone over the basics there. So at the top, the Board of the Governors, we have a few prominent commercial bankers, this Federal Advisory Council. They're folks who advise Janet Yellen and her colleagues about whether they should raise or lower interest rates. And notice these are commercial bankers. So commercial bankers may come at this with a different understanding, a business understanding. Whereas people who sit on the Board of the Governors, they may not value the opinion of business as much. So the commercial bankers have an advisory role. They don't vote, but the people who do vote on what's called the Federal Open Market Committee, which is essentially where they decide how we're going to raise or lower rates, or if we're going to raise or lower rates. That is the 7 Board of Governors, the President of the New York Federal Reserve, and then there's 4, the district bank, the New York District Bank. That person has a lot of power, and then the other district bank presidents rotate 4 at a time through this Board of Governors. All right, so that's an overview of the Fed and the structure of the Fed, and we'll, like I said, continue talking about exactly what they do and how they decide what to do throughout class tonight. All right, the Federal Open Market Committee I mentioned briefly, the Fed's committee that directs the buying and selling of U.S. securities to control the money supply. Let me think, how do I want to do this? Do I want to talk about that right now? Yeah, let's just talk about that just very, very briefly before we dive into it in the next chapter. So, I mentioned that what the Fed is known for is raising interest rates or lowering interest rates. But the reality is they don't control interest rates. There's very little they do to directly control interest rates. The way they influence interest rates is by controlling the money supply. They control the money supply with this technique of buying and selling government securities. So, let's think about how that would work. So if I'm the Fed and I want to lower interest rates, how would I do that? Would I want to put more money in the economy or less money in the economy?
To stimulate. I don't know.
I'm joking. Try again.
So
More.
the opposite.
Yes.
More.
So what happens is they put more money into the economy. The banks, the people have more money. So with more money floating around, does that make it easier for Stephanie to get a loan? Yeah. If you're a bank and you have more reserves sitting in your vaults, then you're going to be more likely to want to loan money to Stephanie, and you're going to charge her a lower interest rate. All right, so the Fed wants to stimulate the economy, so Janet Yellen wants more money in the economy. And how is she going to do that? Well, she's going to do that by buying government treasuries. Meaning, if Lonnie is holding a government treasury, all right, and she has an IOU for $10 million, all right, it's just a piece of paper. The Treasury owes you $10 million, and I'm paying her interest on that. All right, she doesn't have money, all she has is a piece of paper sitting in her vault. So I say, what I want to do is I want to give you that $10 million, and I want you to give me back that piece of paper. So I'm going to buy it. She's holding a piece of paper, and I'm going to buy it. I say buy, think of buy like blowing money into the economy, and selling, I think of that like sucking money out of the economy. So the Fed wants to blow money into the economy because we want more money in the economy because we want to make it easier for Stephanie to get a loan. So I'm going to buy a security that Lonnie is holding. So now she's going to have $10 million in her vault rather than an interest-bearing IOU from the U.S. Treasury. And she's going to say, well, I'm not making any money on this $10 million. What should I do with it? Loan it to Stephanie. Yeah, she's a bank. So Lonnie's a banker. She's in the business primarily, investing a little bit, but primarily loaning. So she has that money. Now she's going to loan it. We've got more money into the economy because I'm Janet Yellen and I just bought her U.S. Treasury.
So what if I wanted to sell it last week, but why couldn't I?
Okay, so you're a bank. You're in the business of loaning out money and getting interest. You could loan it to Stephanie, or you could loan it to me, the federal government. You really don't care who. So if I'm willing to sell you a U.S. Treasury, I'm going to say, you take this IOU and you give me that $10 million. You're now earning interest on this $10 million. And it's all the same to you. You don't care. You're earning interest. You're a bank. That's what you do. If I say, I want you to have it back so that you can loan it to her instead, then I am going to buy it back.
What's the benefit of letting them buy it back if you can be earning interest?
I guess there must be provisions on these things that say the U.S. Treasury can buy back whenever they want. Yeah, and they can usually sell whenever they want because you as a banker, that's what you do. You loan out money. So if you can loan it to the federal government, why not loan it to the federal government?
So they would call the bond early, basically, is what they would do, right?
I guess so.
Now she would get full rate of interest. They call it early.
Yeah.
And say, we want this back to put more money in the economy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she doesn't have to wait 5 years to get paid.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, she doesn't mind waiting 5 years to get paid because she's a banker. That's what she does. She
would like to have the money now. Most people want to have the money now. The value's greater now.
No, she's a banker. She's a banker. What she wants to do is loan out money and get interest. So she can loan it to Stephanie. She can loan it to me. So if I'm the U.S. Treasury, I say to loan it to me. I'm sucking money out of the economy that Stephanie doesn't have access to. If I want her to loan it to Stephanie, I give it back to her.
I'll make more money charging Stephanie.
Yeah, we'll say, who knows if you'll make more money or less money. Let's just assume you'll make the same amount of money. Either getting interest from the federal government or getting interest from a private person. Maybe the interest rates will be a little bit different because there's more risk with the consumer, but let's just assume you make the same amount of money. And you don't care whether or not you're getting paid interest from the federal government or you're getting paid interest from consumers. All right. So if that's still a little confusing, we'll have a few slides to talk about that. I just wanted to warm that up.
Is that possible? Like when you buy the stock from the bank, the interest is low, and when I borrow money from you and you raise the interest and you get money.
Okay, fine. So that's what, yes, that's what Lonnie was talking about. Sure, that's possible that she would get a little more interest from you, so she would technically make more money, but she would be more worried about you defaulting because you're just a private citizen, and I'm the federal government. I have a good credit rating most of the time. So I would say it's easy for us to just assume that she makes the same amount of money no matter who she loans it to, and she doesn't care who she loans it to. All right. So we will revisit that. Hopefully that served as a good warm up. All right. So Janet Yellen supervises the Federal Open Market. All right, the Federal Open Market Committee to increase the money supply if we have unemployment and decrease the money supply if we have inflation. All right. Everything we're going to talk about the rest of the night is just to serve that purpose. Serve one of those two functions. All right. And chapter 19 is where we're going to do that. Ready? Let's just dive in. So, how the Federal Reserve and banks work together to influence the money supply. That's what we'll talk about in this chapter. One thing I need to explain to really get at the crux of this is called fractional reserve banking. We talked about this a minute ago when I mentioned that if you're a bank, suppose Luke is a bank, and he's holding a large savings account. Wait a minute. Okay. Suppose. Right.
Give me a CD or something.
Yes. All right. Suppose Andres is investing in Luke's bank. All right. So he invests $100,000 in Luke's bank. Now Andres doesn't really spend the money. All right. Based on what we learned in previous sections, that's too bad because that doesn't increase GDP. We might like it if he did, but that's not the end of the world. Because here's the thing: when Andres invests the money in Luke's bank, Luke is required to keep a certain amount of that in reserve. It's called a reserve requirement. Required reserve. The minimum balance that the Fed requires a bank to hold in a vault or cash or within deposits with the Fed. So Andres deposits $100,000 in Luke's bank. Luke must keep a required minimum reserve. That's called the required reserve ratio. Let's just say it's 10%. So Luke must keep 10%, $10,000 in the vault. Now what can he do with that extra $90,000? I guess, yeah, whatever he wants. What do you think? He's a banker. Let's assume he's not like a crazy banker who wants to invest in movies or do too much with startup investing or anything like that.
That's in stocks.
All right.
Loan it to other
Brokerage?
Yeah, I'm going to go with loan it to other people as the core function that a bank would utilize. All right, maybe there's some other fancy things that Luke would do because he's got a cutting-edge bank, but let's just say he still does traditional banking activities for the most part. He can loan that $90,000 out. All right, so Dr. Williams comes and he wants to borrow money. How much money does Luke have to loan out?
90% of what?
Yeah, so let's just say he has $90,000. So he loans out $90,000 to Dr. Williams. He goes and buys a new house, pays the contractor for the house, maybe starts a little side business, spends that money. The people who he spends that money on or gives it to, let's just say they come back and they deposit it back at Luke's bank. So that's $90,000 floating out there, being spent. It all ends up back at Luke's bank. But so to simplify it, let's say Dr. Williams spent it all on Lonnie's services to build a house or something like that. The whole $90,000 went to you. Lonnie then deposits that in Luke's bank. What is the reserve requirement that Luke has?
10% of the 90.
Yeah, 10% of that. So he has to keep 10% of Andre's money, which is $10,000, 10% of the 90, which is $9,000, How much money does Luke now have to loan out to Crystal? 81, right? All right, 81,000. So that's the system with reserve banking. So depending on that required reserve ratio, that could influence how much more money is available for other people in the economy to spend. So just a little preview. Suppose the Federal Reserve wanted to spur the economy a little bit. Do you think they would raise the required reserve or lower the required reserve? Lower the required reserve. They say instead of holding that $10,000 of Andre's investment, you only need to hold $7,000. So that's an additional amount the bank could lend out. Now, it is, there's some logical reasons why a bank might want to have, or the Fed might want to have a healthy reserve requirement. You don't want a 1% reserve requirement, because what if Andres needs his money back right away? Well, Luke's like, can't hear you, breaking up, sorry, I'll call you back. Right. So if there's a run on the bank, if there's problems like that could be dangerous for the economy. But if we've got a healthy system that is supported by the Fed, backed up by the Fed, there's insurance, then people are typically not too anxious about sprinting to the bank at the first sign of a financial crisis. They have faith that they're going to get their money. So the Fed knows this, and they say, all right, we can have a lower reserve requirement to get the economy going a little bit more. All right, so fractional reserve. What are those reserve ratios? Checkable deposits between 10 and 44 million. The banks must keep 3% of those deposits. Over 44 million, 10% is the required reserve. So we're looking at between a 10 and 3 and 10% reserve requirement.
What is checkable deposit?
Checkable is like we can write a check on it. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure. That must be aggregate, like the whole. If you have a total, if your bank has total $20 million, then you must keep 3% in required reserve. I think that's what that means. If you have $50 million total, you must keep 10% in the vault or with the Fed. All right. So this is written out the example that I just took us through. So, all right, round one, let's see, expansion of the money supply. So let's say someone goes to Best National Bank and deposits $100,000. All right, $10,000 of that must be held in reserve, and we have an increase in excess reserves. We have the required reserve and we have the excess reserve. Increase of excess reserve of $90,000. And that's the key piece right here. How much did the excess reserves increase by? Well, initially they increased by $90,000. That's how much more money could potentially be sent back into the economy to get it going. All right, that $90,000 goes back into the economy. Somebody spends it. The person who they spend it on now has it and deposits it back in their bank. It doesn't have to be the same bank, it's just a different bank. They deposited in Yazoo, $90,000. $9,000 is required to be held in reserve. $81,000 is the increase in excess reserve. So if we go all the way down here, we do this, I don't know, 100, 200, I don't know, however many times we need to do this round. We add up the increases in excess reserves, and for an initial $90,000 increase in excess reserves based on a $100,000 deposit, we get another $900,000 out in the economy, another $900,000 in circulation of people with ability to chase more goods and services, to get more people working again, to get more people spending again.
But it's all the same 100,000 pieces of paper. Like that.
Yes, it is, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's still people who have the ability to get you to build them a house, or grow food for them, or give them an economics lecture, or give you an economics lecture. So the more we have, the more people have to get people providing their goods and services, the better off everyone is. All right. So let's see some definitions that we just went through. The excess reserve is that $90,000 over and above the required reserve in our example. Potential loan balances held in the vault or cash or on deposit within the Fed. So that $10,000 that Luke must hold in his bank, he can hold it in his vault, or he can send it to the Fed and have them hold onto it because they protect it with really big guns. Okay. I explained this in our example, so let me just go through these slides quickly. How do banks make loans? How do banks make loans? Banks loan money taken from their excess reserves. All right, about $90,000, the excess reserve. How does the money supply increase? Well, the money supply increases when banks lend money to borrowers. We saw it happen. All right, and a figure we can use to calculate how much an initial investment, an initial increase in excess reserves is going to increase the money supply is what we call the money multiplier. Maximum change in the money supply due to an initial change in excess reserves banks hold. The money multiplier is equal to 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So, the reserve ratio in our example was 10%. 1 divided by 10% is what? Check here. All right, so our reserve ratio, B, not an R, reserve ratio equals 10%. Done. Money multiplier, M equals 1 divided by 10%, which equals what? 10. You got it. All right, so the money multiplier is 10. So this is the maximum change in money supply due to an initial change in excess reserves. And remember, even though there's a $100,000 investment by Andres initially, the increase in excess reserves was how much? 90. Exactly. So $100,000 invested, required reserves was 10. So the initial increase was 90. So we take the money multiplier 10 times the initial increase, 90K. And remember how that gave us 900,000 at the bottom, the total increase in excess reserves. All right, now suppose the Fed wants to lower this reserve requirement from 10% to 5%. So let's do required reserve equals 5%. All right, what is our money multiplier now? 1 divided by 0.05. No, close. What I'm saying? 20, absolutely. All right, 20. Now we're talking. Would you rather have a money multiplier of 20 or 10? Well, 20, as long as we're being safe and responsible. All right, as long as we're not going to have any problems that are going to come back and bite us. We like the money multiplier of 20. And then if we had a money multiplier of 20, and we had that initial deposit of $100,000 by Andres, we would have an increase. Oh, no. So what would our required reserves, our initial increase in required reserve would be different, right? Okay, so we have a reserve requirement, 5%. Andres deposits $100,000. What is the increase in excess reserves? 95, right? So the required reserve is 5,000. The increase in excess reserves is 95. So our money multiplier is 20 times 95. All right. What does that equal? Oh, boy. Close to 2 million something? All right. One. Was it
190,000.
195? Yeah, 100. 100. 1,900,000? Is that it?
I think yeah.
Alright. Alright. So, almost twice as much money in the economy as a result of the Fed's lowering the reserve requirement. Alright. So, I think I did some math on that. Money multiplier. Loans are deposited as checkable deposits, which creates loan reserves, and the new loans are checkable deposits throughout the banking system. We went through that whole example. The money multiplier calculation, 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So the money multiplier, 1 divided by the reserve ratio. If the reserve ratio is 1/10, what is the money multiplier? Well, 1/10. Money multiplier is going to be 10. If the reserve ratio is 1/20th, what is the money multiplier? 1/20th equals 20. Money multiplier becomes 20. We lower the reserve requirement. Conclusion, there's an inverse relationship between the size of the required reserve ratio and the money multiplier. And that brings us to an equation. What is the actual change in the money supply? So change in M1. Remember, M1 is the most liquid part of the money supply. Well, the change in excess reserve, we just need to remember that part, not the change in the initial 100,000, but the initial change in the excess reserve. First it was 90,000. If we lower the reserve requirement, it could be 95,000, times the money multiplier. Make sense? Alright. And then I said using data from Exhibit 2, compute the change in the money supply. Change in M1 is the 90,000 times 10 for a total change in the money supply of the first example we looked at, 900,000. We've got that, right? Right. Alright, one quick point before we move on. What can cause the money multiplier to be smaller than computed? So this is in a perfect world where everyone's confident, everyone's spending money, everyone is loaning that, all the banks are loaning that money. What might get in the way of that happening? Well, there's a couple things we'll point out really quickly before we get off this subject. We could have a cash leakage when all the loan money is deposited in the bank of another bank. When all of the loan is not deposited in another bank or put in a home safe. So Lonnie gets $90,000 for building a house for Dr. Williams, but she keeps that money in her safe under her mattress. So what happens then? Does the money supply increase? No, it's just under her mattress. So do you think if we're the federal government, we're the Federal Reserve, do we want her to have confidence in the banking system? Do we want her to think that it's a good thing for her to put her money in a place where it will be safe? Absolutely. We want to encourage that kind of thinking, confidence in the system. Another problem, when a financial crisis causes banks not to use all of their excess reserves for loans. So we tell the banks, hey, you can loan out 95% of your deposits. You only have to keep 5%. And the bank says, we're conservative bankers. That's what we do. We be conservative. And we're in the middle of a financial crisis, so we're not going to loan it out. So that's a problem too. And there's no easy answer to that. I mean, banks make business decisions based on good business investments. The banks would be the ones to tell the federal government, what are you, crazy? This is not a good industry to be in. there's a problem here. I'm not going to loan money because I'll lose it. So this problem is harder for the federal government to manage, encouraging banks to loan when they're the ones who know whether or not it's a good idea because it's their money and it's what they do. The first problem is easier to address. We just try to encourage confidence in the banking system. All right, make sense? Okay. All right, monetary policy. And we talked about fiscal policy, I believe, last time or 2 times ago. And fiscal policy was the government decision-making in spending money and raising taxes. All right, fiscal policy, how much the government spends and taxes, and those decisions are based, one, on the welfare of the constituents, but also often in the interest of spurring the economy. And now we're going to talk about monetary policy, which we've been talking about all night. Now we're just going to continue that discussion with some specific examples. This is the Fed's use of policy tools to change the money supply. So this is another way, another tool we have to spur the economy, another way we have to possibly thinking about how we might address that $19 trillion in debt, how we might get the economy going, get more taxes, get people working more, paying more taxes, so the health of our economy, health of our government is in better shape. Monetary policy. The Fed controls monetary policy, and we'll talk about 3 things the Fed does in their attempts to influence monetary policy. But before we get to those 3 things, let me just revisit 1 of 2 overview questions. What would the Fed do when we have a recession? What would the Fed try to do to the money supply? Someone tell me. You can just read it, but you might have to say a sentence after that. So we're in the middle of a recession. The Fed is going to control the money supply under their what they know about monetary policy.
Oh, they're going to increase the money supply.
Absolutely. Why? What effect is that going to have?
It lowers the interest rate.
Yep.
More
It's
money
going
in
to
the
lower.
market.
Yep. More money in the market. More spending occurs. You got it. What would the Fed do if we have inflation? Too much money in the economy. Too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. The price of those goods and services goes up. Money starts to erode in value. Let's cool this thing off. The party's over. We're in a crazy expansionary, inflationary period. The Fed wants to decrease the money supply. So during expansion, decrease the money supply. During a recession, increase the money supply. 3 ways.
Does the Fed really do this, like, over history? How much has it increased and decreased?
Yeah, they do it. They do it all the time. I don't know.
By a little bit?
That's the thing. When you look at it, when you study it in class, you say, like, really? What difference would a 0.5% of interest make? You're like, I don't know if I would really care about that. If I was trying to decide between borrowing money at 10% and 10.5%, what difference would it really make? But on a macro level, those tiny changes make a significant difference. So yes, they do it. They do it all the time. They try to influence interest rates. And I'm getting to 3 tools they use. 1, open market operations. This is those buying and selling of bonds that we talked about earlier. And we're going to revisit that. If that just sounded a little confusing at the first pass, we'll touch it again. Second thing they do, change the discount rate. Now this is the closest thing they do to directly affecting the interest rate. The discount rate is the rate that the Fed charges to loan money to banks for very short time periods, and they can change that. They can't change the rate that commercial banks charge each other or commercial banks charge customers, but they can influence it, and one of the ways they can influence it is with their discount rate. Third way, the Fed influences bank lending, change the required reserve. Change this required reserve, we change the money multiplier. It's a way to get more money thus money into the economy. All right, so ready to discuss those three things? Let's talk about the first one. Open market operations, buying and selling of government securities. What would the Fed do if we have a recession? So remember, a recession.
Flow.
Yes, blow money into the economy. You got it. So unemployment is high. Let's get people spending again. Get people hiring again. So let's blow money into the economy. How are we going to blow money into the economy? Well, the Fed is going to start buying treasuries. So Lonnie is holding a bunch of treasuries. She has one that says $10 million, U.S. Treasury. She has another one that says $20 million, another one that says $50 million. So what's that? $70, $80 million of government money that she's holding. Now she's getting interest on that money. I'm the federal government. I'm the U.S. Treasury. I'm paying her interest. So she doesn't care so much that Stephanie wants a loan, that Crystal wants a loan. She's like, I don't care. I'm getting paid interest from the federal government. But I'm the federal government. We're in the middle of a recession. I want to inject money into the economy. I want to get things moving again. So I'm going to buy that $10 million bond, the $20 million bond, and the $50 million bond. I'm going to buy it from her. So she now has 3 pieces of paper, and I say I want to buy those. So I give her $80 million, and what does she give me? 3 pieces of paper. Right? Now she has $80 million, and what does she do with it? Keep in mind she's a backer. She loans it. All right, she loans it to someone else. She's in the business of loaning money, and let's just assume she's making about the same amount of money whether she loans it to me or loans it to someone else. So we've got more money in the economy because I'm the Federal Reserve and I bought Treasury securities. All right, does it make sense? Okay, good. I'm glad we touched on that before. I feel like that
What if she doesn't want to sell it?
That's what I want to know. How does it work?
Yeah, well, I think let's assume one thing to simplify. One thing is that she's a banker and she's in the business of loaning money. So why would she not want to sell it to me? Right? That's what she does. So she can get interest from me or she can get interest from someone else. They're also, in direct answer
She
to your
just
question.
doesn't want to settle it, you know. I mean,
Did I
we
buy
see a lot of banks do that. They want to settle the money.
Yeah. So let's also assume that there might be certain provisions in those pieces of paper that says I can buy it whenever I want.
Or how much did I spend on it when I got it? Like, did I pay $1 million for this $1 million bond,
Mhm.
whatever it is?
Mhm.
Or did I pay $500 and now they want to give me $1 million, $500,000?
Well, that'd be a zero
Then I'll
coupon bond.
take
You
it.
could, no, actually, you could. They got to make it attractive to her some way.
I'm going to say that the second and perhaps more important part of this conversation is I'm going to go on record. I'm not sure about this, but I'm going to go on record as saying there's got to be some provision that says I can buy it back whenever I want.
Well, some bonds are callable. There's no question about that.
Yeah. So let's assume she would probably not really care. She would be indifferent if she's large enough. If she's a small bank, that may be a different story. But if she's a large bank, let's assume she has a big operation. She has a whole network of loan officers who have connections with people like Stephanie who need money. They've done the credit checks. There might be a certain cost associated with that, but she's going to charge Stephanie a higher interest rate. Let's just assume it would all balance out. Possibly there's certain situations when it would not, but it really wouldn't affect what the Fed does because they have so many options. There's so many people who would buy or sell their bonds.
Well, but then, like I said, some are callable. You can call them. They got to sell them.
Yes. It's written right on the ring. We're like, you didn't read the fine print, Lonnie. But it's really not like that because, like I said, for the most part, she would want to sell it back to me or buy it from me when I want to sell it. And it might it's just part of the culture that it's already there, already written on the bond. All right. Further question?
No, I did have one other comment, is that we're also assuming that she will loan it, because somehow or another there's got to be some incentive for her to make some money, and that's not always the case. That's one of the problems with monetary policy, is you can make all these things happen. You could call her money, but you can't make her make the loan. And also the question is, how long is the impact going to be? Because you want to have an immediate impact on the economy, and you may not. I mean,
All right, so let's think that through. So if Lonnie is not going to loan it, possibly we might want to buy bonds from someone else.
Well, yeah, you're loaning it to somebody.
Yeah, we might want to buy bonds from someone else, right? Maybe Andres lives in a different part of town, and he's like, oh, my customers are, great business investments. I would love to loan more money to them, but I just don't have it. So I'm going to buy bonds from Andres.
But you got a 40% crash here in 2009. You got a 40% crash. People are losing 40% of their money. They're not going to, you can go all over the country. Maybe you'll find some folks want to do it, but you had a 40% loss right off the top. And that's going to scare everybody.
All right, so what did the Fed do?
The Feds tried to pump more money in there, and the problem was people still weren't loaning.
All right, so what are we going to do? What would we do instead? Armchair quarterback. All right, what would we do instead? One thing, I came up with one idea. I wasn't planning to have this discussion. I said we sell it, we buy it from Andres instead and give him the $80 million because he knows people he's willing to loan it to. What else could we do? We could do like a homeowner, what do you call that? First-time homeowner bonus, something or another. The government will cut you a deal or give you a tax credit if you if you borrow the money. So sort of increase demand that way.
No, that's great, but that goes back to fiscal policy. That's not monetary policy.
Well,
The Fed can't affect fiscal policy. The Fed can only affect monetary policy. But that's a great solution, and I think they did try to do some of that.
All right. So what would the Fed? If we just talk about what the Fed does, what would the Fed do? What else would the Fed do?
The Fed can try to affect the market in some other ways. I mean, what do we have here? What's your other?
Yeah, we got the
discount rate.
Yeah, discount rate.
They could also reduce required reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the ways that the Fed, using monetary policy, can do that.
Yeah. So the Fed. So we would do that, right? We would lower the discount rate, and we would lower the reserve ratio, the required reserve. But still, I don't know how that's going to help your concern that the banks aren't going to lend them money, no matter how much freedom we give them to lend them money.
Buy a lot of the bonds, or the reserves, securities back. Buy a lot of the securities back, hoping that some of those people are going to loan.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's what I said. We said we buy it from Andres because he knows people who he's willing to lend it to. If you're not going to lend it, I'm going to give the money to him. Now the Fed would do all those things, but you're right. There's only so much they can do.
There's only so much they can do, and you got a scared public. I mean, we had, my university folks in their, retirement accounts. They're losing 40%. Just tanked overnight, 40%. So they're not retiring. They're not buying. They're trying to, get back to an even keel point.
Go to school.
Yeah. And I'm sure as the economy was recovering, I'm sure there's plenty of stories about, well, finally the banks are lending, but do you think they're lending to people, to the quote unquote right people? Are they lending to poor people? Are they lending to people who are trying to get out of the lower class and start a small business? Or are they lending to people who already have lots of money?
That's where they're lending, and that's really what caused 2009 anyway, because they're lending money to people who really didn't have the ability to afford the loans they were taking out.
Right. So as I don't have a lot of data on this, but as the banks start lending, they may not be lending to the people that the government might encourage them to be lending to, or at least the liberal-hearted people.
But your idea about the housing, though, that does go to a different class.
Yeah, that's what they did. And what else did they do?
Well, they tried to influence it. They lowered the discount rate. They continued to buy. That's what that quantitative easing was all about. Continued to buy longer than they expected. And they bought different things as well. Generally, they buy treasuries, but to make a bigger impact, they bought other things as well that they generally don't buy when they buy the money.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So Lonnie's holding these 3 treasury bills for T-bonds for 10 million, 20 million, and 50 million. So I just gave her 80 million. But she might be holding some other things. Not only that, but not just that Lonnie might be holding those things, but there might be some places where I normally wouldn't buy from. And I would go to those banks and say, hey, that thing that you're holding on to, that you were planning on holding on for 20 years? Let me buy it back right now. All right. And again, what I'll point out, just so you keep the logic straight in your head, we're using the term buy. Remember, buy, the Fed buys to blow money into the economy. Think of that. Buy, blow money into the economy, get the economy stimulated. What would they want to do if they want to slow down the economy, if we have inflation? Not buy, right?
Not buy.
They would sell, right? They would sell treasury bonds. So I am going to sell Andres a treasury bond. So I'm going to give him a piece of paper. And what's he going to give me?
You're taking money.
Yeah, he's going to give me $80 million. And I'm going to pay him interest on that $80 million. And he says, I'm a banker, what do I care? I'm getting interest from the federal government. I don't need to worry about the poor people who need loans or the other people who need loans. We'll assume that those things are basically a wash. If they're not a wash for Andres, I can find someone for whom they are a wash. Right? I can find someone who's willing to buy these securities that I'm going to sell. So, inflation, I want to withdraw money from the economy. I'm going to sell bonds, suck money out of the economy. All right. So yeah, let's just review this. So this exhibit 19.3, open market operations. So on the right, the Fed sells government securities and banks lose reserves. So sells, suck money out of the economy. I'm doing this one on the right because I've got inflation as my concern. So I want to cool things off, so I sell. I start handing out pieces of, when I sell, that's what I'm doing. I'm handing out pieces of paper. And you're like, all right, now I have a piece of paper, but I don't have $80 million, so I can't give you a loan. Banks decrease loans. The Fed might even start shredding money. I've heard if you go to the Fed in Washington, D.C., you can buy a pen that is worth $100,000 of tiny little shredded up dollar bills. Yeah, I heard that.
I have one of those too.
I have a pen. What's that?
Yeah, I have one of those too. It says there's $100,000 in this pen. I'm like,
Yeah.
but work really hard to get a piece of that together.
Exactly. It might be a little bit problematic. Okay. Conversely, if the Fed wants to get this recession out of a recession, wants to get employment going again, wants to get the economy moving, it will buy securities from banks. Banks now have money instead of a piece of paper, so they can make more loans to the public. All right, make sense? Good, we got it. I think we got it. Discount rate. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is the one thing the Fed does that directly affects interest rates. The buying and selling of securities, that's just influencing it. Now, they do the buying and selling of securities as a larger part of their arsenal of tools, but the discount rate is one thing that directly affects the interest rate. Discount rate is the interest rate the Fed charges to loans on banks. So, say for example, all right, so Andre's deposited $100,000 in Luke's bank. Luke now has $90,000 he can lend out to whoever he wants. Maybe he accidentally lends out a little bit more than that. He lends out $92,000. It's like, oh, everything came in at the wrong time, and now I'm short reserve requirement. I need a loan. So I'm the Fed. I give him a $2,000 loan so he has the proper reserve requirements. If the interest rate on that is really high, he might be reluctant to do that. He might go, the last thing I want to do is have to borrow money from the Fed. That would suck. But if the interest rate is really low, then he's like, okay, I'll loan money to whoever will take it, and if I end up too short of cash, I can just borrow money from the Fed because the discount rate is low. The discount rate also affects the rate at which banks lend each other money. So the discount rate is the foundation. If I know I can always go to the Fed and get money at a certain rate, how is that going to affect the market of other banks lending money to each other? Because maybe it's easier to get money from other banks. Maybe you don't feel like doing the paperwork with the Fed. So there is something also called, all right, this is just a quick, what would we do if we want, we already did that, lower or raise discount rate. We'll skip that over. There's something called the federal funds market, which is the market of banks lending money to each other. So same situation, Luke is required to keep $10,000 in required reserves. He only has $8,000. He needs $2,000 before close of business. He doesn't have time to call the Fed. He borrows money from Crystal's bank. What does she charge? Well, she charges an interest rate based on a couple factors. One, what's the discount rate that she could get money from the Fed? So she's going to do some approximation of that. She's also going to decide based on how much money she has. And how much money she has is the money supply. Right? So in order to influence the larger picture of the federal funds rate, the interest rate banks charge for overnight loans of reserves to other banks, the Fed is able to substantially influence this rate by adjusting the discount rate and the money supply. So I'm sitting at the Fed wondering how I can influence this federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is, have you all heard of the federal funds rate before? All right, well now that you know it, you will hear it on CNN, you'll hear it on MSNBC, you'll hear it more now that you've heard it. It is the more commonly quoted term. Very rarely will you hear the discount rate because it's just kind of a theoretical starting point. I mean, it's not theoretical, it's an actual starting point. But apparently it's much more common if Luke is short of funds at the end of the day to go for a quick loan to another bank on the federal funds market. And the Fed can determine that interest rate, the federal funds rate, can determine it with two ways, the discount rate and the supply of money. So let's just talk through the two ways that could happen very quickly. So suppose, what would the Fed do during a recession? All right, somebody want to take that one for me? And I'll give you a hint. The next one is, what would the Fed do to combat inflation? No suspense here.
Is it decrease the discount rate?
Yes, they would decrease the discount rate. What else would they do?
Increase the money supply?
Yeah, so just to sound that out for me. So they decrease the discount rate to make that rate at which banks loan each other money lower. So as a whole, you all, a community of bankers, you say, let's just lend as much money as possible. We come up short a little bit at the end of the day. I'll just borrow some from you. Next week, if you need to borrow some from me, you can. This is all easy because the Fed has set a low starting point on the discount rate, and the Fed has also taken measures with the open market operations, the buying and selling of securities, to make sure that there is plentiful amount of supply for everybody.
Encourage or discourages lending based on the rate.
encourages lending, right?
Encourages lending.
Encourages lending. Yes, you got it. All right. How about the opposite? What would the Fed do if the economy experiences inflation?
The opposite.
All right, take it for us, Andres.
Increase the rates and take out the money.
Yes, yes. So you as a community of bankers, you're all helping each other out, but gosh, this hurts a little bit more when I come up short at the end of the day. So I'm gonna slow down on this whole lending thing because I have to pay more to borrow money from Crystal's bank because she's like, well, I'm sorry, the Fed raised the discount rate and I just don't have it. I don't have as much money because the Fed has been selling Treasury securities, i.e. sucking money out of my vault, and it's just not as plentiful. Right. Make sense? Okay, so we know we're talking about three tools, the three primary tools the Fed has in monetary policy. The first, open market operations, buying and selling of securities. The second, discount rate, which we've talked about. And by extension of the discount rate, the federal funds rate we'll call a better known close cousin of the discount rate. And now we're going to talk about the third thing, which we already have a pretty good idea about, which is the reserve requirement. Required reserve ratio. Fed determines how much a financial institution might keep in reserve as a percentage of its total assets. All right. What would the Fed do during a recession? Take it for us, Crystal.
Decrease the reserve ratio?
All right, and just give us a refresher. How does that put more money in the money supply? Same thing we talked about 45 minutes ago.
Puts more money into supply because it decreases interest rates. No, I'm confusing everything.
All right, so it doesn't. Good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Crystal. It doesn't directly affect interest rates, but remember we used the example initially. Andres deposits $100,000 into Luke's bank.
They essentially keep less.
Yes, Luke is now required to keep less, so he has more money to loan out to someone else. He has $95,000 he can loan out versus $90,000. And if all these things are working together, he now has $95,000 he can loan out, and he doesn't care so much if he happens to loan out a little bit too much because the discount rate is fairly low. He can just go borrow money at a fairly low rate from Lonnie. And Lonnie has the money because she just got a bunch of money from the Fed because the Fed bought securities from her. Okay, so the reserve ratio is just that principle we talked about. All right, and we've got at least one more. I don't know, this might be the last slide, I don't remember. What would the Fed do if the economy experiences inflation?
The opposite.
The opposite. All right, we'll just
Decrease the ratio.
all right, let's make a good effort, though, on this last slide. So somebody paint the picture for me. What's going on in the economy? And then talk me through what happens as the Fed decides about the... okay, go for it, Luke.
They increase the reserve ratio, so they keep more and lend less.
Yes. All right, and what's going on with the economy at this time?
At this point, inflation's high, so I would think people want their money now, and it's worth more now than it is later due to inflation.
Everything's costing more.
So
Yeah, so inflation's high, but what... Okay, so let's sound out the inflation being high, though. Why is that? That's potentially a problem for the reasons Luke is mentioning. That if inflation is high, people are going to be like, my money is worth less now. Right? This money I have in my bank account, it's not as worth as much, and it could get
in
out.
terms of inflation, it's
Yes.
better less.
Yeah, so but inflation is just like the one negative among a potentially lot of positives here. Like, what else is going on that's positive?
Expansion.
Expansion. All right, there's a lot of people working, a lot of people spending money, And that is potentially what's driving this inflation problem. So the Fed has to be the sober person at the party and says, all right, it's time to cool this off just a little bit. And as Janet Yellen is making this speech, you can actually see the market start to go down. The party's over. You'll hear that term a lot.
The Yellen parent.
The Yellen variant. You'll hear that term a
Hopefully
lot.
she's the DD.
Designated driver, exactly. Everybody's like, come on, just let it last a little bit longer.
Taxis are expensive.
Yeah.
Inflation.
All right. Okay, actually, we have one more slide. You will be happy to know, which sums up these three things. So let's do it. All right. Let's do this. Do you mind if we take like 10 more minutes? Is that okay? I think this will be useful.
Oh,
You guys.
it's already 8 o'clock, so I guess so. No, I'm joking.
So let's have, all right, maybe we can have like you three be our Fed in experiencing an expansionary period. You three are worried about inflation, all right? And you're going to explain to us those three expansionary policies. You're going to tell us what we're going to do and what the effect is of each. All right, you three, you're going to be dealing with this recession. All right, we're going through a contraction, and we need to control. Wait, did I get this right? Did I get this wrong? Hang on, did I say that wrong? You three are going to explain the three contractionary policies. So you're going to contract, open market, open market purchase. So purchase means you're going to buy. So you're going to blow money. Yeah, all right. So you three, yeah. So you three are the expansionary. So that means we're in the middle of a recession. Sorry about that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you three are trying to combat recession, and you're going to explain the three expansionary things we're doing. You three are the buzzkills at the party who say, we need to start contracting this economy. So, all right. So again, and I just want to refresh, like paint the picture for us. What's going on in the economy? What do we need to do about it? So yeah, so why don't you like all three get together, decide who's going to take which one, and think of a funny way to introduce what's happening at the economy with the economy.
One way to introduce a recession.
Yes, exactly, exactly. A post-apocalyptic world.
Which one you want to do?
It doesn't matter.
I could do the first one.
Expansionary. So we're all
And
talking about
it's
recession anyway. So.
Expansion, so
You want to
it's
do
cool down.
the required reserve?
Yeah, that's fine. And then, I'll do that rate, discount the open market.
Open market.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can do the second one.
Yeah.
So
Recession, discount rate,
And then on
lending.
One person opens a market operation sale, that means I have to sell on, or sell security.
so that was the one. I have the reserve ratio, so we wanna increase that, so we can keep more money in the bank, decrease money in the market, and decrease loans going out, so we can control the economy, so we don't have inflation. That's a lot.
So what is this? Oh, the mechanism of what that is doing.
No, I'm doing the last.
London.
Yeah.
Yeah. The money in the market is decreased.
Because banks don't care about loaning money to each other as well.
All right, you need a couple more minutes? I'll be back in like 3 minutes. Does that work?
Yeah.
All right, we'll start in 3 minutes.
So you want to,
So people
you want to increase
the
the
discount
discount rate
rate.
so banks can't, the
Won't
banks
as
don't
much
worry about
money,
money.
yeah,
Yeah.
to go off, everything's going on the economy.
You're making the taxes cost more. In between parties, the people, I'm trying to think of some way.
And then the interest rate as well would increase.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
So then less loans are out, less money.
Less people want to go to parties because the taxi costs more. That's the fun. It costs more to go between each party. Like if we're thinking of it as a party. I'm trying to make
Yeah,
it
let's talk
Right.
about our credit.
it's gonna
My
cost too
point
much.
is like I told everyone we don't have enough money, so we cannot support anymore.
Yeah, you can't keep going and
And
go
go
to another party.
Yeah.
It's costing too much money to go in between parties and buy all this stuff. And if the banks have to keep more money in their pockets, they can't spend.
All right, you ready? All right, who wants to start? We start with Team Combat Recession over here.
Sure.
All right. Team, so paint the picture. Tell us what's going on in the economy. And tell us what you're going to do to fix this.
I'm first.
I mean, I can go first.
I can go.
Okay.
Well, the economy is in really bad shape. We're in the middle of the depression or recession. There's been a 40% loss in investment accounts. The mutual fund on which I serve on the board has had world-class redemptions. The fund itself now has dropped from 900 billion to 600 billion and is heading in the down even further. Stocks are overvalued. Redemptions are up enormously, and so the way
Wait, stocks are overvalued?
Yeah.
Okay.
then there's going to be a hard correction,
Okay.
and that means these stocks are just going to all of a sudden tank
Okay.
because of the recession.
Okay.
When the correction comes, so we need to try to stop the correction that's coming, and the way we can stop the correction, one of the ways is that we can start buying more on the market in the open market operation, increase the reserves, and the Federal Reserve Chair, Janet Yellen, needs to go on TV right now saying that money is on the way. We're going to stop this recession, and that everyone should open up their bank accounts.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. I feel more confident already. Okay. All right. What else? I'll let you. I'll let you all run the meeting. If you tell me when you're done. Present.
I can go. I'll do the discount rate.
How's it going?
I didn't get into it that much, but I do agree that we are in a recession, and we, according to the discount rate, what we want to do is blow more money into the market, decrease the discount rate in order to encourage banks to borrow more money, eventually loan more money to people, which hopefully will encourage or lead to more spending and higher GDP.
Perfect. I'm inspired.
So for required reserve ratio, it's going to decrease. So they want to decrease the reserve ratio to stimulate a money multiplier increase, which would increase money supply. This way, banks would hold less in reserve and would stimulate excess loans for more borrowing and lend more money and deposit more to stimulate the economy.
Great. What if
Prevent recession.
what if there's a run on the bank and everyone wants their money out?
I guess they would have to borrow more from the Fed, or deposit more from the Fed.
Yeah, we'll borrow from the Fed. Say, I can't hear you, getting bad reception. That's not going to happen. Tell us not. We won't worry about that. Great. All right, excellent. So team fixed recession. Those are 3 fantastic tools. I like it. All right, we've got team combat inflation. Let me turn the camera over here so we get this. All right, so I'll let you 3 run the meeting. Tell us.
That's not my good ego.
We'll be
I'm
fast
hiding.
forward to the end. So right now we're in expansion, and everybody's drinking way too much at this party, and we're going to have to say, okay, party's over, it's time to cool everybody off, have some coffee, and I'm going to sell some securities.
All right.
And that's to suck money out of the economy. They have too much money to buy too many drinks, and everything's costing much more like inflation.
Yeah, I like that. Too much
Because they
money,
can
too many
charge more,
drinks.
'cause everybody's there drinking, having parties.
Everybody's buying. All right.
That will, reserves will decrease also, and it will decrease the money supply. And
For the discount rate increase, which means the interest will be going up and the money in the market will going down. So as a party, like we don't have enough money to buy more stuff, so we start to selling what we have and get more money.
Okay, so I'm not going to be able to buy that new beach house I wanted, though. I really want that house, though. I need you to keep interest rates low just for another couple years. Can you do that? Please? No? No? Okay, alright. Alright.
And another way to cool off the economy, because inflation is happening, is to the reserve ratio will decrease. So you're gonna have, or increase. So you're gonna have more money in the bank, and you're gonna be loaning out less amount of money, and in turn, decrease amount of loans going out, decrease money in market, and the money multiplier also decreases.
That's just wasted money sitting in the bank. Why not just loan it out?
Because you want your money to have meaning.
Oh, yes. You don't want our money to become worthless.
You have to
Fantastic.
have like at least $20 in your pocket before you can go home from the party. You can't spend it.
Good, good. Excellent, excellent. So we got some great monetary policy tools to add to our arsenal of fixing a broken economy. Great work. Great work. I will see you all next week. I think next week's our last class, right?
Is it?
Well, no, it's not our last class.
Oh, I was going to say. I was like,
We
what?
got, well, it's our last real class. All right,
Scared me.
after that, we have review, and then after that, we have the final.
How long will the final be? How many questions?
I haven't made it up yet, but like I said, each time I make the quiz each week, I just make a parallel set of questions for the final. And so, like the same question. Like I say, this question that I'm quizzing you on, let me have an identical, not an identical, but very similar question. So I guess I won't end up using all of them. How many questions do you have each quiz? Like,
15.
It's usually like, yeah, we have one where it's
Goes up
like
every time.
15, one was 12, one was 18, 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, it bounces around.
yeah. So I guess
7 in there.
I'll probably cut the questions in half would be my guess. So maybe it'll be like, I don't know, 60.
Because I took one
The more
I
the
took
better,
midterm
right?
that was 150, and I was so tired that it wasn't even like, it was a lot. 3 hours straight. 3 hours. straight.
Online,
Yeah.
150 questions.
Yeah, I had an
6
online
hour
class
time.
like that was timed.
Yeah.
And he gave us he had to decrease it for the second ones because I was timing it, and I had like my husband came and talked to me in the house, like shut up, I only have this amount, and I have more problems to the time. Like there was way too many questions for the time allotted. It was crazy.
So I had that, but
And you
he
have
gave us